Essequibo River, Venezuela-Guyana border, 7:15 a.m., humid jungle morning, perfect visibility. Venezuelan Mi-17 helicopters crossed into the disputed zone, 12 of them, carrying 200 troops moving toward Guyanese positions. Behind them, Venezuelan army convoys, artillery pieces, river patrol boats. All heading into territory Venezuela claimed, but Guyana controlled. Caracas called it a sovereignty protection exercise. Georgetown called it an invasion. Then, 40 kilometers away, a sound Maduro's forces had never heard in South America. The deep rumble of AC-130 gunship engines, 4 of them, each carrying enough firepower to destroy every Venezuelan position in the disputed zone within 12 minutes. What happened in the next 31 minutes became the fastest deterrence operation in South American history, because Venezuela wanted to demonstrate military capability in disputed territory. America demonstrated what gunship supremacy looks like, and why resource-rich borders require more than helicopters and political declarations. This is that story. The Essequibo region, 160,000 square kilometers of dense jungle, winding rivers, and contested sovereignty. Roughly 2/3 the size of Guyana itself, the territory has been disputed since 1899, when an international tribunal awarded it to British Guyana, now Guyana. Venezuela never accepted the ruling. For 125 years, the dispute remained frozen, diplomatic protests, occasional rhetoric, but no military action. Then, in 2015, ExxonMobil discovered oil, massive offshore deposits, estimated 11 billion barrels. Suddenly, empty jungle became the most valuable real estate in South America. Guyana began granting exploration licenses. Venezuela protested. Tensions escalated, but still no military confrontation. Until 3 months ago, Venezuela's economy, already devastated by sanctions and mismanagement, deteriorated further. Oil production collapsed, currency became worthless, food shortages worsened. President Nicolás Maduro needed something, a distraction, a victory, a way to claim resources without international permission. The Essequibo became the answer. Venezuelan state media began campaign. Rightful Venezuelan territory occupied by foreign puppet state. Historic injustice must be corrected. Sovereignty cannot be negotiated. Classic preparation for territorial seizure. Guyana watched nervously. Their entire military, 3,000 personnel, small arms, a few patrol boats, no fighter jets, no attack helicopters, no way to stop Venezuelan forces if Caracas decided to move. But Guyana had something Venezuela didn't account for: a defense partnership with the United States and a phone number to U.S. Southern Command. At 4:30 a.m. on November 3rd, Venezuelan Ministry of Defense announced Operation Southern Shield, large-scale military exercise near Guyana border, testing rapid deployment capabilities, sovereignty protection drills. The announcement was deliberate, public, designed to intimidate. At 5 a.m., Venezuelan forces began moving. 12 Mi-17 transport helicopters lifted from Tumarimo Air Base, 80 kilometers from the border, each carrying troops, weapons, supplies. Behind them, ground convoys, BTR-80 armored personnel carriers, BM-21, Grad multiple rocket launchers, 2 S-1 Gvozdika self-propelled howitzers, river patrol boats departing from staging areas. By 6 a.m., Venezuelan forces had crossed into the disputed zone, not near the border, deep inside Essequibo territory. 200 troops establishing positions around contested villages, artillery setting up firing points, riverboats blocking waterways. This wasn't an exercise near the border. This was territorial occupation. Guyanese Defense Force immediately contacted Georgetown. Emergency cabinet meeting convened. Foreign Minister made 2 phone calls, first to CARICOM, Caribbean Regional Organization, second to U.S. Southern Command in Miami. The conversation with Southern Command was brief. Venezuelan forces have entered Essequibo in significant numbers. We're invoking security consultation protocols. Can you assist? The response came in 45 seconds. Roger, assets are already moving. Hold your positions. Do not engage unless directly attacked. We're handling this. Because U.S. military intelligence had been tracking Venezuelan military movements since the announcement at 4:30 a.m. Satellites monitored every helicopter, every convoy, every boat. Signals intelligence intercepted Venezuelan military communications, and contingency plans already existed for exactly this scenario. At 6:20 a.m., 4 AC-130W Stinger II gunships took off from Eglin Air Force Base in Florida. They'd been on standby alert for 48 hours, crews briefed, weapons loaded, flight plans filed. The 700-mile flight to Guyana would take 90 minutes. Simultaneously, U.S. Southern Command contacted Guyanese government with specific instructions. Position your forces defensively. Document all Venezuelan movements. Do not initiate contact. American air assets will be overhead within 2 hours. Venezuelan forces will not advance further. At 6:45 a.m. 2MQ9, Reaper drones launched from Cooperative Security Location in Curacao. Armed reconnaissance. Their mission, reach Essequibo before the gunships, provide real-time intelligence, track every Venezuelan position. At 7 a.m., Venezuelan commanders in Essequibo received orders from Caracas. Establish full territorial control, raise Venezuelan flags in occupied villages, prepare for permanent presence. Guyana cannot resist. International community will protest but accept reality. The commanders followed orders, troops moving into villages, engineers preparing to build fortifications, propaganda officers filming for Venezuelan state media, everything proceeding according to plan. At 7:15 a.m., the Mi-17 helicopters conducted second-wave insertions, more troops, more supplies, building momentum for what Caracas envisioned as permanent occupation. Then, at 7:18 a.m., Venezuelan air defense radar detected aircraft, 2 contacts, high altitude, approaching from the north, small radar cross-section, profile suggested reconnaissance drones. Venezuelan air defense crews reported to command. Unidentified aircraft entering operational area, likely American surveillance drones. Request instructions. Response from Caracas. Monitor but do not engage. Surveillance is expected. Continue operations. The MQ-9 Reapers reached Essequibo airspace at 7:20 a.m., flying at 25,000 feet, sensors activated. High-resolution cameras began documenting every Venezuelan position, every vehicle, every artillery piece, every troop concentration. Thermal imaging tracked heat signatures through jungle canopy. Synthetic aperture radar mapped terrain and structures. Within minutes, complete tactical picture transmitted to U.S. Southern Command. Venezuelan forces had established 3 main positions. Northern cluster, 80 troops, 4 BTR-80s, 2 artillery pieces. Central position, 60 troops, river patrol boats, command post. Southern position, 60 troops, BM-21 rocket launchers, supplies. At 7:28 a.m., U.S. Southern Command transmitted updated intelligence to Guyanese Defense Force. We have complete tracking of all Venezuelan positions. Your forces should maintain defensive posture 15 kilometers from Venezuelan concentrations. Do not advance. Do not retreat. Air support arriving in 20 minutes. At 7:35 a.m., Venezuelan troops in northern position heard something. Deep, distant rumble. Multiple engines, heavy aircraft. The sound grew louder, closer. Then they saw them. 4 massive aircraft, flying in formation, circling at 15,000 feet. Slow, deliberate, directly overhead. Venezuelan soldiers looked up through jungle canopy. Those weren't transport planes. The profile was wrong. The flight pattern was wrong. These were gunships. At 7:38 a.m., Venezuelan commander in Essequibo, Colonel Rafael Torres, contacted Caracas urgently. 4 American AC-130 gunships overhead, circling our positions. Request immediate instructions. At Venezuelan Ministry of Defense headquarters, sudden confusion. A C-130s in South America? Overhead already? The timeline didn't make sense. These aircraft couldn't have scrambled from Florida in response to the operation. They must have been pre-positioned, which meant Americans knew about Operation Southern Shield before it launched. Emergency meeting convened. Defense minister, military chiefs, intelligence directors. The question, how to respond. A C-130 gunships represented something Venezuelan forces had never confronted. Each aircraft carried 105mm howitzer, 40mm autocannon, 25mm Gatling gun. Precision sensors could track ground targets through darkness, weather, jungle. One gunship could eliminate Venezuelan positions in minutes. 4 gunships could annihilate the entire operation. But they were in international airspace, over disputed territory, not directly threatening Venezuelan forces. Shooting at them meant war with America. Ignoring them meant proceeding under direct observation with no counter. At 7:42 a.m., orders transmitted to Colonel Torres. Continue operations. American aircraft are reconnaissance only. They will not engage without authorization from Washington. This is political posturing. Complete your mission. Colonel Torres read the orders, looked at his officers. They'd all served in Venezuelan military for decades. None had combat experience. Their equipment was Soviet era, poorly maintained. Their training focused on suppressing domestic protests, not fighting professional military forces. And overhead, 4 gunships carrying more firepower than Venezuela's entire air force could deliver. Watching, tracking, waiting. At 7:45 a.m., the AC-130s established orbit pattern, each gunship covering one quadrant, overlapping fields of fire, sensors locked on every Venezuelan position. The crews didn't broadcast warnings, didn't make radio contact, just circled. A silent demonstration of presence and capability. Venezuelan troops watched the aircraft. Some took photos with phones, others checked their rifles nervously. A few asked their officers, "What if they attack?" The officers had no answer, because standing orders said continue operations. But tactical reality said those gunships could kill everyone in the disputed zone before Venezuelan air defense could even respond. At 7:50 a.m., Guyanese President Irfan Ali received secure call from U.S. Southern Command. "Madam President, Venezuelan forces have stopped advancing. Our aircraft are maintaining overwatch. We recommend you issue public statement. Announce that Guyana is operating under defensive security partnership with United States. Make it clear any further Venezuelan advancement will be met with coordinated response." At 7:55 a.m., Guyanese government issued emergency broadcast. The government of Guyana condemns Venezuelan military incursion into Essequibo territory. Under existing security cooperation agreements, Allied forces are providing defensive support. We call for immediate Venezuelan withdrawal and return to diplomatic resolution. The statement didn't name the United States explicitly. Didn't need to. Everyone watching knew what Allied forces and defensive support meant. 4 gunships overhead made the message clear. At 8 a.m., Venezuelan state media began broadcasting footage of Operation Southern Shield. Troops raising Venezuelan flags, officers declaring sovereignty, Maduro preparing to address the nation. The propaganda machine was already running. Then, at 8:05 a.m., everything changed. U.S. Southern Command transmitted message on open Venezuelan military frequencies, not encrypted, public. Venezuelan forces in Essequibo region. This is United States Southern Command. You are currently under continuous observation by armed American aircraft. We have precise coordinates of all personnel, vehicles, and equipment. Any hostile action toward Guyanese forces will result in immediate defensive response. We recommend you communicate with your command authority. Acknowledge receipt. The message broadcast in Spanish. Clear, professional, not threatening, just factual. 4 gunships overhead. Complete tactical awareness, defensive authorization, acknowledge. Colonel Torres listened to the broadcast. His radio operator looked at him, waiting for instructions on whether to respond. Torres didn't respond. Instead, he contacted Caracas again. "Americans have broadcasted warning on open channel. They have our positions. They're authorized to engage in defense of Guyanese forces. Recommend immediate orders." At Ministry of Defense, reality was sinking in. This wasn't political posturing. American forces had deployed within hours, established air dominance, demonstrated complete intelligence awareness, and made clear they would engage if Venezuelan forces advanced toward Guyanese positions. Venezuela's options? Continue advancing, risk confrontation with American gunships, lose troops and equipment, suffer international humiliation. or halt operations, maintain current positions, claim victory through propaganda, avoid military disaster. At 8:15 a.m., new orders transmitted to Colonel Torres. Halt forward movement, establish defensive positions at current locations, await further instructions. The Venezuelan advance stopped. Troops took defensive postures, artillery ceased movement, helicopters remained grounded, not because of Guyanese opposition, because 4 AC-130 overhead had just demonstrated that territorial occupation requires more than ground forces. At 8:20 a.m., 2 more aircraft appeared, U.S. Air Force C-130J transport planes. They didn't enter Essequibo airspace. Instead, they began landing at Chedijagan International Airport in Georgetown, Guyana's capital. On board, 120 U.S. military advisors, communications equipment, intelligence systems, defensive weapons. Venezuelan intelligence monitored the landings, reported to Caracas. The Americans weren't just providing air support, they were establishing ground presence, embedding with Guyanese forces, turning temporary deterrence into permanent partnership. At 8:30 a.m., President Maduro addressed Venezuelan nation on state television. Operation Southern Shield successfully demonstrates Venezuelan military capability and sovereignty commitment. Our forces have established presence in rightfully Venezuelan territory. This operation proves Venezuela can defend its interests despite foreign interference. The speech claimed victory, showed footage of troops, flags, equipment, declared territorial control, but carefully avoided mentioning American aircraft overhead, avoided explaining why the advance had stopped, avoided acknowledging that Venezuelan forces were now frozen in position under foreign air dominance. At 9 a.m., U.S. Southern Command issued public statement. United States maintains security partnership with Guyana consistent with regional stability objectives. American forces will continue supporting Guyanese defense capabilities. We call for peaceful diplomatic resolution of territorial disputes through international legal mechanisms. The statement was diplomatic, professional, but the subtext was unmistakable. 4 gunships still circling, MQ-9 Reapers still tracking, military advisors on the ground. Partnership isn't temporary. By 10 a.m., international reaction began. Brazil, Colombia, and Caribbean nations issued statements supporting Guyana's territorial integrity. Organization of American States called emergency meeting. UN Secretary General urged de-escalation, but the military situation was already decided. Venezuelan forces occupied 3 positions in Essequibo, but they couldn't advance, couldn't establish permanent control, couldn't function under continuous American air observation. They'd moved forward, then stopped, not by Guyanese resistance, by American deterrence. Over the following 48 hours, diplomatic negotiations intensified. U.S., Brazil, and Caribbean mediators pushed for Venezuelan withdrawal. Caracas refused, claiming sovereignty established. But Venezuelan forces remained frozen in position, unable to advance, unwilling to retreat without face-saving agreement. At 72 hours, compromise reached. Venezuelan forces would withdraw to pre-operation positions. Both sides would return to diplomatic negotiations under international mediation. No permanent occupation, no military victory, status quo restored. By day 5, Venezuelan helicopters extracted troops. Convoys withdrew, riverboats departed. Essequibo returned to Guyanese control. Venezuelan state media declared successful demonstration of sovereignty, but never explained why the demonstration ended after 3 days. Strategic implications rippled through South America. First, small nations with U.S. security partnerships couldn't be easily intimidated. Guyana had 3,000 troops, but American air power arrived within hours. Numbers didn't matter when the other side owned the sky. Second, territorial disputes couldn't be resolved through rapid military fait accompli anymore. Not when satellites tracked every movement, drones documented every position, and gunships could respond faster than ground forces could consolidate control. Third, Venezuela's military limitations were exposed. Despite 120,000 total personnel, they couldn't sustain operations under air superiority threat. couldn't counter surveillance, couldn't protect forces from precision strike capability. Numbers meant nothing without technology, training, and logistics. Most importantly, regional powers learned that American security partnerships in South America still meant something. For years, analysts questioned U.S. commitment to the region. China investing heavily, Russia selling weapons. America seemed distracted by Middle East and Pacific. Essequibo proved otherwise. Within hours of request, American forces deployed, established air dominance, demonstrated overwhelming capability, not to fight, to deter, and deterrence worked. Within a month, Guyana signed expanded defense cooperation agreement with United States, permanent radar installations, regular training exercises, intelligence sharing. The temporary deterrence became permanent partnership. Other Caribbean and South American nations took notice. Trinidad and Tobago requested enhanced maritime security cooperation. Suriname opened discussions on military training. Colombia expanded intelligence sharing. The message spread. Security partnerships with America still matter. Venezuela quietly shelved plans for future operations in Essequibo. Maduro continued claiming sovereignty in speeches. State media showed footage from the brief occupation. But military planning shifted to defense, not territorial expansion, because they'd learned the lesson: political claims don't survive air supremacy. Today, Essequibo remains under Guyanese control. Oil exploration continues. ExxonMobil drilling proceeds. Venezuelan protests continue diplomatically, but no military movements. And in Guyana, citizens occasionally see large aircraft circling at altitude, training exercises officially, surveillance missions realistically. Reminders that small nations with the right partnerships can deter larger neighbors. That territorial control requires more than historical claims and ground troops. That air power changes border disputes. 7:15 a.m., Venezuelan helicopters crossed into Essequibo. 200 troops, artillery, riverboats, sovereignty declared. 7:46 a.m., 31 minutes later, 4 AC-130 gunships overhead. Complete tactical observation, defensive authorization. Venezuelan advance stopped. 0 shots fired, 0 casualties. 1 strategic message delivered. Territorial seizure requires air supremacy. Ground forces without air cover are targets, not conquerors. And small allies with American partnerships cannot be easily intimidated. This is the Essequibo. This is South America. This is what happens when you claim territory without considering who controls the sky. Venezuela demonstrated they could move troops. America demonstrated they could stop any movement. The difference between political declarations and military capability. The difference between temporary occupation and permanent control. Maduro wanted a victory, got a stalemate, wanted territorial gain, got strategic humiliation, wanted to demonstrate power, demonstrated limitations, 4 gunships, 31 minutes, complete deterrence. Because sovereignty isn't declared, it's enforced, and enforcement requires more than speeches and soldiers. It requires the capability to defend what you claim against anyone who challenges it, from any altitude.